designating historic resources in the county, a walk through the Glenmont Shopping Center, and reusing old furniture for a good cause. All that and the latest news coming up next on Montgomery Plans. Thanks for watching Montgomery Plans. I'm Michael Brown. We're here to bring you up to date on important land use issues facing those who live and work in Montgomery County. On today's show, we'll explain how we protect historic resources and why. Next, we'll visit Glenmont to see up close what planners will consider as they take another look at this community on the Red Line. And we'll introduce you to a local nonprofit that places donated furniture in the hands of people in need. But first, let's go to the top news-making decisions of the Montgomery County Planning Board.
Welcome to Plans in the News. I'm Susan Kennedy. Montgomery County planners have undertaken a comprehensive rewrite of the county zoning ordinance. The team is working to simplify a complex, outdated code that hasn't been revised in over 30 years. The zoning code was originally written in 1928. The code has been revised and amended many times, the last time in 1977. The result today is a code that is antiquated, unwieldy, and inconsistent.
Full of footnotes, which really not even a lawyer could love. And it is very difficult to understand, and it's hard to find the answer to a question, even when you're familiar with it.
The goal of the zoning rewrite project is to create a code that is understandable and meets the needs of a 21st century Montgomery County.
And a lot of the zones are very similar to other zones. So the development standards are going to be largely the same. What you can do in those on your land is going to be the same. But some of the zones are very similar or are not used anymore. So we're consolidating them so we can have fewer zones and clearer standards.
Can you show me on this example here some of those zones that are changing?
Yeah, so these zones are a great example. The R60 zone, the R40 zone, and the RMH zone. Those are three zones that are very similar. The R60 is the largest of those. Of those three zones, R60 is 98% of the land area of those three zones. And it's where you would find in like Woodside Park, the inside the Beltway communities, single-family neighborhoods. And the standards are identical to R40, and we don't even use R40 anymore. So we're trying to consolidate those zones so we can have clearer standards. And those are proposed to move into a zone called RMD6, which stands for Residential Medium Density 6.
Planners are working on recommendations to condense the current 28 residential zones to 11. The changes will consolidate zones that are redundant and remove from the code zones that are no longer used or recommended in master plans.
So currently, these are slightly different lot sizes, and we can move those into one zone and still have the same size buildings with a little bit of variation. So this is townhouse low density, townhouse medium density, and townhouse high density, which we think is a little clearer than RT6, RT8, the RT and a number.
Planners also took a long look at the county's commercial zones. They want to move away from single-use zones that represent an outdated 1950s era design for commercial shopping.
The county is largely built out, so we're trying to create some new tools for the planning department so that as new master plans come forward, we can build areas that are more walkable and more mixed use.
So I see there are a lot of commercial zones here, and they're being condensed into 6 zones. Is it the same sort of criteria as we used over here with the residential zones?
So the goal of the rewrite is to keep the existing densities and the existing heights that are currently allowed whenever we translate the zones. So because the commercial zones are so varied, it was difficult to create a one-to-one conversion like we have with the residential zones. So these zones, we read through all of the master plans, every single master plan in the county. If there was a specific recommendation in the master plan for densities or for heights, then the new zones will take that into account. If there wasn't a recommendation, then we retained whatever you could do under the current zoning. So each parcel essentially is getting a fine-tuned zone that is fit for the master plan recommendations or for the current zoning allowances there.
I think a very illustrative graphic. It shows you in a bar chart how much the zoning code has changed over time.
And recently, the County Council adopted a set of commercial residential zones to encourage a variety of uses in some of the county's commercial areas.
But we are going to try and fold some of these other zones that we currently have into the CR family. We also have zones that we're proposing as part of the rewrite, the EG, which is Employment General, the ELS, which is Employment Life Sciences, and the EOF, which is Employment Office. And those zones will take some of the zones that are not appropriate to be converted into CR and convert them into what we're calling the E zones, the employment zones.
So really, this sounds really complicated, but in the end, we're trying to simplify things for folks, aren't we?
Yes, and actually we think it will be a lot simpler for residents to understand what can and cannot be done on their property and on the property next door. And here's a great example. So this is an example of a particular CRT zone. So this is a family of zones. The lettering here, CRT, tells you which category it is, which lets you know what uses are allowed. The 2.0 is the overall density that's allowed. And then you have a commercial element, so this is the total amount of commercial density, the total amount of residential density, and then the maximum height. So currently you'd have to read the master plan, you have to read the detailed standards in the zoning code to figure out exactly how high a building can be built. It might be affected by the master plan, it might not be affected, it's very difficult. This will tell you the height is 65 feet, the density is 1.5 FAR for residential, and they cannot go over those levels. But this is not just the CRT zone. So this is one particular example of the CRT zone. It could be CRT 2.5, or it could be CRT 1.0 on a particular parcel.
But that's very helpful to have it broken down into those categories, and it makes it easier to understand.
And this is how it will appear on the zoning map. So you'll be able to open the map and see that, and you'll know exactly what the density and height is allowed.
Planners will complete their draft code revisions this summer and will present a draft to the Planning Board in the fall. Residents have been invited to more than 80 meetings to date. They will continue to have many opportunities to stay involved over the summer and into the fall when the code revisions are reviewed by the Planning Board and ultimately the County Council. I'm Susan Kennedy for Plans in the News.
Montgomery County's unique history lives on in the more than 3,000 sites protected in the county's master plan for historic preservation. From a simple log tobacco barn in Damascus to an elaborate Art Deco theater in downtown Silver Spring, historic resources provide a snapshot of the structures, neighborhoods, and landscapes that help us understand our past. Preserving historic resources doesn't mean that homeowners' hands are tied. Historic designation can be the starting point for a new way of looking at a home and add value. Here's Valerie Burton with more.
Since 1979, when the County Council approved the Historic Preservation Ordinance, planners have helped protect architecturally or historically significant sites in Montgomery County. Planners say they like being part of an effort to both preserve history and advance sustainability by retaining, and in many cases improving, older structures rather than tearing them down and constructing new. Recently, I caught up with Scott Whipple to find out how it's done. So, historic preservation is an integral part of planning in Montgomery County. How do we go about researching and designating historic resources?
There are usually three ways that we look at resources. One way is through the master planning process, and so resources might be considered as the planning department and planning board is doing a sector plan or an area plan. The second way we do it is by evaluating resources that were identified on something called the Locational Atlas, which is an interim list of resources that might merit historic designation. And the third way that we do it is when we receive nominations from the public.
Historic preservation staff researches any property being considered for designation for historic or architectural significance. Preservation planners present their analyses to the HPC, or Historic Preservation Commission, a 9-member panel appointed by the county executive. HPC forwards its recommendation to the Planning Board, which in turn makes recommendations to the County Council. Then the County Council makes the final decision. Throughout this succession of hearings, the public is invited to comment.
The house at 8820 is a little bit smaller.
And, since 1979, quite a few sites have been preserved.
There are about 430 sites that are listed in the master plan for historic preservation. There are about 22 historic districts. We're here today actually in one of our 22 historic districts in Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park was designated back in 1992, and it's the largest historic district we have in Montgomery County.
430, is that a lot?
It seems like a lot, doesn't it? And then when you add on all of the buildings that are in the historic districts, there are about 3,000, a little bit more than 3,000 buildings that are protected. It seems like a huge number, but in fact it's a really small number. There are about 400,000 buildings in the county, so it's less than 1% of the buildings in the county have historic protection.
Jim and Katie Sebastian were drawn to the historic district of Tacoma Park.
Well, we like historic homes because they have a lot of character. Also, we love historic neighborhoods because they've got front porches and sidewalks and old trees. And in Tacoma Park, the historic area is also near the metro, walking distance, so a lot of walkable destinations, so we like that as well.
Like many homeowners, the Sebastians decided to make some changes to their home. They enlisted the help of Hisao Yatsuhashi of Broadhurst Architects. Because their home is located in a historic district, the project needed to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission.
All houses that are in a historic district, they have certain designations. This house is a contributing resource to a historic district, which means it contributes to the character of the neighborhood. So going in, we know that it's a historic house, so we'll make sure the design is sensitive to that, while still getting any kind of design features that the homeowner would like to get. It pretty much fits in with our philosophy. We like to respect the existing house, do respectful additions, so it wasn't that much of a burden at all. It just kind of fit in with how we do things normally, with a couple of extra steps, that's it.
Those extra steps begin when a homeowner submits an application for a historic area work permit. Homeowners submit a 2-page form and supplemental material that describes the scope of their job. Then, preservation planners present a staff report to the HPC. Scott Whipple says that homeowners shouldn't worry.
The Historic Preservation Commission is really pretty flexible in how they evaluate projects that come in. Nobody has to do anything. There's no affirmative preservation, so there aren't historic house tours. You don't have to open your house to the public if you're designated. But when you want to do a project, there is a review process that you have to go through. It's a pretty efficient process. The Historic Preservation Commission usually hears applications in about 3 weeks after the applications are submitted. There's no cost for submitting the application. And for a lot of these projects, there are tax credits that are available when the project's completed. So a lot of people see an advantage to being designated.
The great thing about living in a historic home and a historic neighborhood is we know that our investment is going to pay off because these neighborhoods have lasting value, and it also helps to be able to take advantage of tax credits. So 10% of the work we did, say on the painting of the house, we get a credit for that, and the new roof we put on at the same time.
In the process of renovating, the Sebastians were able to add 21st century green features, satisfying their desire to make their historic home more sustainable.
Probably the biggest thing we did was solar panels. We added 19 solar panels onto the roof, and that was really made possible by the addition. When we moved here, we have basically an east and a west facing roof, and that was not good for solar panels. But the addition allowed us to put panels because we have a new south facing roof. And that's probably the biggest issue for historic as well. But because it's in the back on the new roof, you really can't even see the panels from the street. So that's what allowed us to do that on this house.
With the addition, the Sebastians made their home more energy efficient. This house right behind us.
The property owners.
But the greenest component is that the original structure was preserved.
Architect Carl Elefante has said that the greenest building is the one that's already built, and that's really true. We believe that in preservation. In fact, the National Trust for Historic Preservation just released a survey where they showed that it is far more sustainable to reuse old buildings than it is to tear them down and to build even energy efficient buildings. The study shows that it takes somewhere between 10 and 80 years for new energy efficient buildings to recoup the amount of energy that goes into demolishing an old building and producing a new building.
But historic homes aren't necessarily energy efficient. That's why the Historic Preservation staff ran a program that uses state funds to provide grants for energy audits. So Scott, we're passing by one of the homes that participated in your unit's energy audit program. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. This house up here on the right is one of the 10 properties that received a grant to do an energy audit. We hired an auditor, and they went out and did energy audits, like the property that we just went past. And at the end of the program, the property owner got a report that spelled out the most cost-effective methods to address energy concerns at their property.
So I see this blue house is being renovated, and it's in the historic district. What does the Historic Preservation Commission review when they're looking at a historic area work permit application?
The Historic Preservation Commission has design criteria that they use in evaluating projects. Some historic districts, like Tacoma Park, have their own design criteria that are written specifically for the historic district. But the Historic Preservation Commission is looking at all exterior changes to designated resources. So if you're making, if you're doing an addition, or if you're making other changes to the exterior, if you're doing new construction, or if you're trying to demolish something in a historic district, the Historic Preservation Commission has to review it. But interior changes are not reviewed. They're not subject to a Historic Preservation Commission review.
So does the Historic Preservation Commission regulate paint color?
They don't. We like it when people paint their houses, and paint keeps water out of buildings. That's good for historic buildings, and so the Historic Preservation Commission doesn't take a look at paint.
Historic preservation planning ensures that important places from our past are preserved for future generations to enjoy, explore, and study. For more information on historic designation or the historic area work permit process in Montgomery County, visit montgomeryplanning.org/historic.
When Montgomery Plans returns, Around Town with Rollin Stanley. Stay with us. On today's Around Town, Rollin Stanley and Susan Kennedy tour one of the busiest intersections in Glenmont as planners begin to revisit its master plan.
We are in Glenmont, and I'm here with Planning Director Rollin Stanley. We're in the center of Glenmont. We're in the midst of a sector plan here. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to see and some of the challenges that are faced in this area of the county.
This is a fine example, Susan, of a place in the county where there's tremendous opportunity to affect positive change that will be great on this site as well as the surrounding community. And as you look around here, you see a massive amount of parking fronting onto the typical strip commercial retail, which presents a lot of opportunity for things to happen over here over, say, the next 15 years.
So this is something we talk about a lot and we hear a lot in planning circles, surface area parking that's basically unused land. How can we better utilize this in this plan?
Well, both in the short and the long term, when we look at things, you've got a big surface parking lot. It drains over to there, it goes straight down to the Chesapeake, and that's not good. We need to find ways to make that better along the edges here, even if nothing happens here in the short term. In the longer term, you have the wonderful opportunity of this parking lot. And that opportunity is the ability for the owners to do something here now while they maintain all these leases, generating revenue on this site while they incur debt to rebuild in the parking lot and provide surface parking. And then with the green roofs, at the end of the day, this becomes a much better place in so many respects, including environmental.
What are some of the challenges, though? That doesn't sound it sounds easy when you explain it, but what are some of the challenges?
Well, this is not going to be as easy as we have in some other places. And the principal reason why it won't be as easy here is the fractured ownership. There's 14 or so different owners of what you see right here, and the lot lines are squonky all over the place. And it becomes an issue of getting everybody on the same page and working together, or some people buying some people out, in order to create that continuous ownership to get redevelopment to occur. And that's been one of the challenges on this site forever.
But we have the metro very close by here, and I would think that that would be sort of an attractive part of this redevelopment, that folks would want to be closer to that.
That's true, but remember, even in a place like White Flint, where you have one of the highest grossing retail locations in the country, nothing happened there all through the decade of 2000 to 2010. It was only until we found a reason for people to change, and that was upping the density, for example, where people said, okay, I'm now willing to cancel leases, I'm willing to take on debt, which they didn't have, many of those folks, in order to take the risk to do something new. And so what you've just described is true of a lot of metro stops in the county where we see them being underutilized, but it's also a question of, this almost looks like, if it isn't 100% leased. So you have owners here with very stable tenants, and you'll recognize some of the names, who are paying the bills.
Okay, there are some transportation improvements that are planned, so why don't we go over and talk about that?
Sure.
Roland, there are a lot of transportation options here in Glenmont, and there's more to come down the pike. Tell us about how that will play out as this plan develops.
Well, it's happening both in road infrastructure and longer term in terms of transit. So the big change is just over here where we see the intersection with Randolph and Georgia, where they've already started the undergrounding of services in order to create a grade separation. So what will happen here is if you're moving east to west on Randolph, you'll be going under Georgia, and moving south on Georgia, if you want to turn left, you'll be able to turn left. The other thing you see is you see the bus station here, and this is a very heavy bus route. We've got the metro station just up there, but still people get on here to ride the bus beyond that, and it's not a great environment for people. But this is one of our corridors we're studying for bus rapid transit to try and improve all of this. And certainly, if the plaza can get redeveloped, we'll see a lot of opportunities here. And this whole thing has to be reworked as part of the plan to think about how the traffic, buses, the transportation network can function better here.
You talk about bus rapid transit, and we see that this is a bus-heavy area here. That may be a key to alleviating a lot of the woes that we have here as far as getting around.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing that we're talking about is this is a great opportunity when you consider bus rapid transit, the metro, etc., that if this place develops correctly with the future growth we expect in the county, if we can get more of that growth to occur in places like this, then the new growth compared to the same amount of growth in the past will generate fewer car trips because people will have more options. And getting employment here and people living here this close to the transit means that growth won't generate as much car traffic. And that's a positive for everybody.
What about the folks who live here, those established residences? How will they be affected by this redevelopment?
The great thing that it'll do for folks like living across the street here is, well, one, we need to get better connectivity into the neighborhoods around us. You can just see here as the cars are trying to negotiate, this is not a signalized intersection, but we need to enable the people who live in the residences to get into this site better, because as this site will develop, and even now with the services that they come to, this will be a benefit to them, and get people channeled into safe crossings so they connect to this place.
Denser, residential, business, all of it.
Mixed use. We have a mix of uses, we don't have mixed use. You've got the houses over there, you've got the commercial over here. If we can try and start to combine those things, then it's better for everybody.
And this is a perfect place to do that.
Perfect place.
You're hoping for community involvement as this plan evolves. There are some community sessions planned. What are you hoping to get from folks who either have businesses here, who live here? What kind of input do you want from them?
Well, first of all, we need new input. There's a lot of folks living up in this community who don't traditionally get engaged in the public process. And one of the challenges in any of our master planning processes is the changing face of the county. To try and reach a new demographic, because they have to tell us what they need here. And that'll get down to the level of saying what services they don't have. Now, planning can't say it's got to be this thing versus this thing, but we can help create the framework to encourage those kinds of activities to occur that they feel don't happen here now.
Okay, good information. We'll get that out to the folks and let them know that they can participate. That's going to wrap up this session of Around Town. Maybe we'll be back in your neighborhood next time.
Reduce, reuse, recycle. We are all trying to limit what is thrown in a landfill. Everyone agrees it's better for our environment. It is also better for our community. In our next segment, we will visit a local nonprofit that is changing lives with recycled furniture. This showroom in Silver Spring has everything: tables, chairs, dressers, couches, mattresses, or anything else you need to furnish a home.
All right, so today's first day at...
Mark Bergal is the director of A Wider Circle.
And A Wider Circle helps families that are seeking to rise out of poverty. The first thing we do is help families get their basic need items. 10 years ago, I noticed in home after home of families to whom I was bringing food as a volunteer that they had none of these items. They had no couches, they had no dressers, they had no lamps and end tables and coffee tables. And I knew that we had this stuff in this region. I knew that couches like this were being discarded everywhere. And I knew that just a mile away from where they were being discarded by people who didn't need them, there were many families that really needed them.
Hi, Kimberly. This is Gail calling from A Wider Circle. How are you? So I was wondering what I could do for you.
What was the furniture you were looking for?
We save families at least $1,500 on the purchase of these items because everything we give out is free, and that's what we kind of estimate the value of every truck that goes out of here is carrying about $1,500 worth of merchandise.
Beds, living room set, bedroom set, dinette set, toys for the kids, and I'm blessed.
While the main goal of A Wider Circle is to supply basic need items for thousands of people, it also has had another effect on recycling in Montgomery County.
The beautiful thing about the recycling element of our services is all this furniture would have ended up somewhere else, usually a landfill. We did about 1.5 million pounds of recycling last year. 1.5 million pounds of stuff, otherwise headed for the landfill, is now in people's homes who had nothing. Items like furniture don't decompose overnight. They could stay for a long, long period of time. So it always gives us a lot of comfort, as well as the families we serve a lot of comfort, to know that instead of being in the ground for decades and decades, this stuff will serve decades and decades of families, generations, kids who would otherwise be sitting on the floor will now sit on this. Instead of storing their clothes in plastic garbage bags in the corner of their room, they'll keep their clothes in these dressers. So we're bringing mattresses that were donated by a local hotel, and we're going to bring them into the room here to steam them so that when we distribute them to people, they know that they're free and clear of anything from bed bugs to anything else that people might worry about with mattresses. Everything from beds to couches, chairs, anything with cloth, we put through a commercial steamer, which is really nice and gives us comfort knowing that when the folks get these items to their homes, they're clean and ready to be used. All these items we'll just kind of assess. Are they good enough to go out on the showroom floor? Are they of dignity quality? Whether they're shoes or clothes, baby clothes, kitchen items, blankets. Even over here we have car seats and strollers, and our volunteers will go through them, and we'll try to make sure that every single one gets cleaned up and put outside in our showroom, so that every possible piece that can be put to good use is put to good use. We try not to waste a thing.
A lot of the furniture that is donated is actually really nice, and like me and my friends were talking about it, we were like, oh my god, I would totally get this couch. Like, this is an amazing couch. All the stuff that families pick out, they get really happy when they find it, and you're like, oh, that's really sweet, because like now they have something else for their family. And so you think of like the kids, and you find toys for them, and you see kids picking out toys, and it's really nice. It like gives you a happy feeling inside.
Yeah, I think anytime you're doing good in the community, it usually touches on several areas. So when we help folks who are living in poverty, having a program that is also very green makes perfect sense, because there's enough stuff in this county, especially in this county, there's enough stuff that nobody should be living in the type of need they are living. And recycling just makes perfect sense. You don't have to think about recycling plastic or paper, only you can think about how do I recycle the basic need items we have. We're no longer needing this bed, we no longer need this dresser, it's time to recycle it, give it to somebody else who needs it. To me, that's the definition of recycling and of being an eco-friendly organization.
For more information on A Wider Circle, visit their website at awidercircle.org. Visit our website at montgomeryplanning.org for complete, up-to-date planning information in Montgomery County. There, you'll find ways to access the Planning Department's many services. You can check out our blogs, see what's going on, submit feedback, and follow us on Facebook. Well, that does it for this edition of Montgomery Plans. Join us again next time when we bring you more on the issues that affect quality of life here in Montgomery County. I'm Michael Brown. Thanks for watching.